Hello, my name is John Ham. I will be presenting my series of work leading up to my clad bounding box. The most integral part of this series of assignments is how light interacts with the wire hand in the clad bounding box. This starts with the design of the hand. I drew my hands under many different conditions using graphite and ink in 3 different styles. I chose the drawing which I thought contained the most interesting attributes and translated it into 3-dimensional object using a malleable wire, creating this wire hand. The wire hand is created to the same scale as my actual hand. I transitioned back into 2 dimensions by drawing the wire hand under 2 different conditions of light, including the shadows that were cast. This is drawn using graphite. To find where the most complex geometries lay within the drawn wire hand, I moved the drawing into Illustrator and drew regulating lines. I placed these regulating lines based on where there were intersections in the wire hand itself. These regulating lines section off parts of the hand into a more detailed view of a smaller section within the hand. With the design of the wire hand done, I needed to create something that supported the wire hand, so I started designing the frame. The most important part about the frame is how the corners would connect, so I created some joint studies in order to find how they would connect. I started this design process in my journal so that I could get some quick sketches down of how the joints would interact. Once I had 4 designs down, I translated them into 3 dimensions in Rhino and then created a physical model out of basswood, which is what I would use to create the frame for the box. I want to create a joint that would lead to a sense of depth in the frame itself. I did this by basically creating an outside supporting structure and an interior structure where the hand would actually be. In order to get the design done for the frame, I created different iterations in Rhino and stuck with my favorite model, which is shown here. The smaller pieces of wood laying in the interior structure were placed off of the regulating lines I created in Illustrator. To transition from Rhino to a physical model, I needed a series of steps that showed the order to create the frame. I created this GIF which is playing. This helped me make sure I assembled the frame correctly. I then created the frame as a physical model using precise joint work. It was created out of basswood. In order to create the interesting shadows and viewports in the frame, I needed to clad the frame. In order to find out where the cladding should lay in the frame, I created a Rhino model differing the transparencies of cladding. I placed the more transparent cladding in locations where the regulating lines extended in my Illustrator drawings, and the openings where I thought the most interesting geometries were located. To have a better understanding of the frame, and to understand how I could connect the cladding to the frame, I made a series of section views of my frame. I used varying line weights as well as shades in order to show where different sized pieces of wood are. I discovered that having the cladding seem as if it was floating was the most appealing idea to me. In order to create this effect in a physical model, I used white thread that was only located in the corner so it couldn't be seen. Once I knew where the cladding would go and how I would attach it, I finally attached it to the frame and hung the wire hand from the top using a more rigid wire. I photographed it using a light source pointing up from the bottom. In order to get a scale to the box, I created a Rhino model where the box was positioned on a 3'6" pedestal in the center of a 10x10 room. I included some scale figures in order to show the scale of the clad box and the pedestal in relation to a person. I created an alternate design for the pedestal and positioning of the clad frame. In the end, I decided to keep the pedestal and clad box in the center of my room that was partially blocked by the semi-transparent doorway. This was done in order to make someone that was viewing the box want to move closer to the interior and move around the clad box. I also wanted to let the viewer feel free to view the clad box in any way due to the fact that the view through the clad box was already constricted. I placed the front side of the box facing away from the doorway to make the viewer want to find a more interesting side. This is the gift of the procession of movement throughout the box and around my clad frame.